Raindrops keep falling on my head, and just like the guy whose feet are too big for his bed, nothing seems to fit. Those raindrops are falling on my head, they keep falling. Raindrops keep falling on my head.
We were raised on Western movies. Howard Hawks and Raoul Walsh and John Ford. We were raised on this.
The first time I became aware of a name on the credits of a film that I liked was the name of John Ford.
A 10-year-old kid going to the movies on Saturday afternoon, and there was Rio Bravo. And I'll never forget the effect of seeing that film.
I actually saw Stagecoach on a re-release when I was about 11, 12 years old. The impact of the movie was, even then, enormous.
I can say that it actually is one of the elements that drew me into learning how to make movie and become a director.
It is hard not to see the impact the Western had on the directors that would become known for later crystallizing the action picture.
I've heard that you're a low-down Yankee liar. Prove it.
And where some of the most impressive gunplay of American and even European cinema lives forever. But I'm not going to dwell for too long on action like this. The more obvious moments, fantastic though they are. I want to look back just a little further to what inspired this sort of work. Starting here though is gonna be controversial, because I'm about to say something that might surprise some. I'm not the biggest fan of Sam Peckinpah's experimental back and forth intercutting of geographical points in slow motion, giving the jarring effect of staying both back in time in slow motion at one point, but in real time at others. It is of course impressive that he played with such ideas at the time, and he could stage a hell of an action scene.
Oh my God.
In fact, his work will be explored in more detail later in this series. But this never fails to draw me out a little from the chaos. There are times that I enjoy this specific technique, but only when narratively it feels like it has purpose. Such as how a dead Billy the Kid is able to execute Pat Garrett through time.
Pretty fair shooting for an old married man. Just lucky, I guess. Oh, hey, kid. It's good to see you. Good to see you.
And that is where I want to begin. What Peckinpah did so well for me was the impact the violence in his films had. Not just in the tremendous power of the gunshots, but the power of the moment. The effect violence could have, even if you'd only just met someone for a single scene before.
I'ma take this badge off of me. I can't use it anymore. It's getting dark, too dark to see. Feel I'm knocking up on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door.
Or its role in the myth-making and undoing of the West itself.
At least they remember.
Now, of course, not every action film of today ignores the effect that its action can have on the characters and the world they inhabit. But to me, the Westerns of old often understood, in a micro or macro sense, the weight of death. and were the first to really understand how to physically portray it. Sure, Westerns were not without their faceless drone-like enemies, typically the savage Indian stereotype, which I don't think there is a great deal to learn from now.
Let's concentrate on the chief. We get him, we might have a chance.
Instead, I want to discuss the more personal moments, the smaller stakes, the drawn-out, tense, precisely constructed pieces of action that led to the slumping, rolling, painful deaths of the Old West. The Western was really where this sort of physically and narratively heavy killings began to appear.
He's dead.
The impact of having something like this happen, which was truly violent at the time, had to be earned by the film and the filmmaker, if, for one thing, not to feel too explicit. The Western hero, if you could actually often call them that, especially with the more revisionist the genre became, has a lot in common with our more regularly seen action heroes of today. As Robert Warshaw wrote in his influential 1955 essay, The Westerner, the Western hero is a lonely figure, a melancholic archetype, inherently ready for action. Anthony Mann, one of my favourite Western directors, had the purest description of the simple Western hero. In fact, he didn't say hero. He called it a man with a purpose, a man who goes from here to there, and things happen to him. It might seem simple, but the Westerns I'm going to explore here could easily be called simple. And that simplicity, that purity, where all that was important was the mission, survival, and whether the hero would bring themselves to end another man's life, is what I think some of the action cinema of today has lost. For a start, the weaponry in Westerns was, well, basic. You had fists, knives, handguns, rifles and bows and arrows, shotguns. And for the most part, that was pretty much it.
A lot of people would stand up against each other, pistol to pistol. A person breaks out a shotgun and it changes the dynamic of a gunfight right away. I've always had a thing about reloading in movies. I've never liked it when the gun shoots too much. I have to admit, when I did the fanning, I shot my gun more than 6 times, and I'm kind of not a person that wants to do that, but the fanning is such a mythical part of the Western, and haven't seen it in such a long time. I had no way of justifying other than hell spells I wanted to do it.
And due to the lack of rapid-fire weaponry, for the most part, ranged gunfights were slower, tense affairs, where each bullet meant something. In fact, violence was often the last and shortest part of any thrilling scene in a Western.
If you want to do something, when I get out on the porch in the clear, take that flower pot and throw it through the window. And duck after you throw it.
Typically, they would build and build, usually from the start of the film, but especially in the violent scenes themselves. Until the release of fists or gunfire would come in a quick, sometimes cathartic flurry. Relating back a little to his contemporary Sam Peckinpah's use of slow motion, I've always liked this quote from workman thriller director John Frankenheimer.
I always believe that violence happens very quickly. I don't believe that violence happens in slow motion. So I refuse to use that kind of music video slow motion stuff that you see so often here. I just did it in all of this in real time. I just think it's much more exciting.
Get up some noise!
See that lone peak? You'll be safe there.
Well, what about you?
I'm going to finish this. They come, I'm going to finish this once and for all.
Oh, but what?
Some things a man can't ride around.
Bud Bettaker made a series of short B-westerns, 7 Men from Now, and 5 other films known as the Renown Cycle, before finally 1959's Westbound, all starring Randolph Scott, that were done on the cheap, written and produced very quickly, and all with similar thematics.
In my pictures, Randy has a problem, and you care about Randy, and it's very important that he solves that problem before the picture ends, and that's what I do. I tell the story.
They were economic in everything: character, setting, runtime, and action. But they made the most of their limitations by having the world be one that instead of being full of action, action could instead happen at any time.
The nature of the way people moved in the frame, the starkness of the imagery, lent itself to the impression that when anytime anybody moved, it meant something.
I have, of course, now got to talk about tension again.
You don't understand. I give the word. You're dead.
Maybe, but before I hit the ground, I'll blow you half in two.
There was never much in the way of actual action Bettaker could do on set, due to the time and cost of it.
Hold your fire, boy! It ain't gonna work. I knew I should have done it my way.
But working with regular Western writer Burt Kennedy, they were able to create moments that were thrilling because of just how the action could erupt whenever and wherever.
Fixing to have a little hanging, I see.
There is an inevitability to this, not only here, but in how the whole film has been leading to this moment. This is a story of revenge.
When I got home, my wife had gone. Frank had been there, taken her, brought her here.
Here?
Yes, ma'am. He hung her.
So, this has further narrative importance and increased tension.
It's me you're after, Brigade. You got no quarrel with Billy.
What quarrel did you have with her?
That was a long time ago.
He's got 2 Winchesters behind him, Frank.
Any shooting that horse will go right out from under Billy.
Someone has already swung from this tree before. If our hero is to get his vengeance, won't we see a hanging now?
Don't leave a man much choice, do you?
The violence is over quickly, but all of that build before. It's electric. The action in these types of westerns felt like the exclamation point at the end of a well-written sentence. And I just wanted to take a chance here to highlight one of my favourite moments in any western, the final image of Ride Lonesome.
I think guys like Bettaker, who were sort of out of the mainstream, were much more influential on Sergio Leone than a lot of the mainstream guys, because Sergio was always looking for something different, and these guys would try all these crazy things.
An awful lot of law for one little cow town.
This is the kind of cow town that needs a lot of law.
The previously mentioned Anthony Mann had his own cycle of westerns, for the most part starring James Stewart.
Keep your hands wide.
All of them are worth viewing for Mann's precise control of geography during tense, long-range gunplay. But it is in one of his perhaps slightly less spoken about westerns that I think he really showed what he's capable of, and created one of the earliest, truly great gunfights. Gary Cooper, that icon of thrilling Western cinema, and if you haven't seen his real-time, rivetingly tense Western High Noon, then go watch it immediately, starred for Mann in one of the earliest truly revisionist Westerns, Man of the West.
I used to live here once.
When you were a boy?
Oh, I don't know what I was.
Starring as a man who cannot escape his past, the film builds and builds pushing Cooper toward an inevitably violent end.
You know what I feel inside of me? I feel like killing. Like a sickness come back. I want to kill every last one of those Tobins. And that makes me just like they are. What I busted my back all those years trying not to be.
Your gal's gonna dress for us. We saved a front row seat for you.
The filmmaking choices throughout are startling, especially for the time.
Link!
This scene is painfully uncomfortable.
Now undress. Start with the shoes.
It honestly goes so much further than would be expected for a 1958 CinemaScope Western, especially in how it eschews any music that would over-describe the emotion of the moment. The near-climactic sequence happens in a once bustling ghost town, in which Cooper's old gang had hoped to rob its now barren bank. And the seemingly only citizen of Lasue is cruelly gunned down.
Lady, we're not going to hurt you.
One thing to note here, as the action kicks off, is just how Mann uses the frame. Pay attention especially to the deep focus. Your eye always goes to where Mann wants it, but with everything in focus. You get a sense at all times of spatial awareness, which helps build the understanding of geography, which will become important as he uses near every inch of this contained area in the ensuing gunfight. Cooper waits until his soon-to-be assailants arrive. And in deep focus, we see them approach, as the camera seems to give us over to the bad guys. Now they are given the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the geography, so we know now that everyone is on the same page of understanding.
Over here, cousin!
As the men approach and separate and the bullets do start, one thing to notice is how the 180-degree line is used, but in a somewhat flexible way. The geography has been established enough that we can't really lose either of the attackers. But still, it is only by this point we see Dana from this side of the line, and it is only to re-establish our understanding of his spatial relationship to Wilk on the rooftop. As we continue that here, we literally have both enemies close in on him from above and below, pressing down on him at the same time as removing his cover. In terms of the 2 steps forward, 1 step back, as soon as Cooper kills Wilk, he takes a bullet. Now, as Dana approaches, our shot sizes shrink to closer mid-shots, as we do not need those full wides anymore. The situation and the frame is closing in on Cooper. Finally, I love Mann's use of this 2-shot to build both geographical understanding and tension.
Claude, where are you?
You gotta come to me, Link!
After this, we don't go back to that wider shot again.
You coming, Link?
Until we need it to capture Cooper's movement. Nowadays, I shudder to think just how this would be covered, but here it is simple, effective, and precise. Before we end with, to me, one of the most painfully cynical scenes of 50s cinema.
Señor, ¿qué pasó?
I'm sorry.
As the husband of the woman we saw shot at the start of the sequence comes home, where all he has is her.
Juanita!
To remind us that Cooper is not some hero. He's just a man, moving from here to there.
I don't think I've ended any of my films with any kind of exaltation. Really more tired and he's done the job, and thank heaven it is done.
It may seem less complex, even arguably rudimentary now, but scenes like this are perfect to study, since they do slow the pace down. They are easier to pull apart, to reveal the work that surely went into them. Learning why the camera placement, character blocking, and structure of the editing were employed at this rate allows you to speed it up in scenes like this. That, though faster paced and more handheld, utilise the same theories behind eye lines, geographical understanding, deep focus, and general scene construction.
Anything to say? Adam loose!
One of man's slightly less successful westerns perhaps, but one of my favourites, is Bend of the River.
Spread out and attack!
A film that did something that truly helps the most important aspect of the western and general action hero: myth-making.
Thank you.
During the first attack, we see James Stewart and Arthur Kennedy work side by side to defeat the Shoshone. As these two men later become mortal enemies, the perspective shifts,
2 hours at the most!
putting Kennedy and his band of roughnecks at the forefront, as Stewart becomes the unseen force of terror, picking them off out of sight.
You and Red. Ride herd for a while. Red ain't here.
It allows us to feel the power of this figure.
I'll be seeing you, Glenn.
You'll be seeing me. You'll be seeing me. Every time you bed down for the night, you'll look back into the darkness and wonder if I'm there. And some night I will be. You'll be seeing me.
We see this used often to establish the frightening, almost ethereal power of action heroes. It's something Michael Winner utilised throughout the underrated Chatto's Land, starring Charles Bronson, a king of B-westerns of surprising quality. And that I was unsurprised to see Sergio Corbucci utilised in Navajo Joe. Where the American Western hero was perhaps just a figure moving from one place to another, the spaghetti westerns were all about creating a mystique around their heroes. Through perhaps not giving them a name, or through taking the drifter elements of the American westerns and deepening it, making these figures ghosts of a wasteland, culminating in the finale of Eastwood's directorial triptych and in some ways a cap to the western, with the near-spectral Pale Rider, that followed the majestic The Outlaw Josie Wales and High Plains Drifter, with its titular, almost hellish central figure. Starting with Clint, the spaghetti western is where the cool western star began to emerge, chosen as much for their look as anything else. An action lead paradigm that holds out today. But where our action stars, save pleasingly for some, don't really let themselves be beaten or roll around in the dirt, focusing more on being an image of power from the very start.
Hey, you still with me? Barely!
These characters were made miss by the end of their pictures, through what they had achieved, before seemingly vanishing into the ether. These heroes traversed fantastical, theatrical, and ultimately cruel worlds, earning their mythic status.
Nei film di Ford, quando un attore apre la finestra, è sempre per guardare l'immenso futuro che c'ha davanti. Nei miei, quando aprono una finestra, hanno solo il terrore e la paura di ricevere una palla in mezzo agli occhi.
Much has been written on the relationship of Leone and Morricone, for instance, and the way they could so perfectly communicate action and character through just camera movement and music.
Perché il pensiero dell'attore, quello che non dice,
può essere rappresentata dalla musica, quindi lo sguardo di un attore immobile che sentiva alle sue spalle o davanti a sé qualcosa insopportabile, era pieno di sospetti, ricordi di cose terribili o delle cose molto semplici.
This was something Corbucci, through his use too of Morricone's powerful scores, understood perhaps more bluntly. It was in specific moments, especially at the finale, that music would come in, the theme fully committing to the idea of the film. To the hero becoming a myth at the point that they had fought the most for their status. Where before we remembered the Western film, and the character was perhaps more just a vehicle for the star, these hero characters often shone brighter than anything else in the films.
Corbucci would give his heroes something that gave them almost superhero qualities. However, then he takes their prowess away from them. The thing that sets them up as the superhero cowboy is gone. And then he makes them face the villain.
These heroes were cool, yes, but beyond that, they were committed to their cause, and so were the actors that portrayed them, willing to have themselves reach death's door before barreling through it, guns blazing. That is the making of a true action hero. A big part of everything I've discussed here is in the revisionism and reinvention of the Western, but that didn't always come from internally. You may notice a big gap in the history of these films. A certain Japanese influence is missing. Well, the back and forth borrowing of Kurosawa, Leone, and Hollywood will not go unnoticed. As next week, we focus specifically on perhaps the single most formative film in the action history canon, Seven Samurai.